I spent 5 years making a documentary that pretty much no one will ever see. And sadly, that is not an uncommon story. I want you to learn from my mistakes, so when you make your next documentary, you can make something enjoyable, viewable, and, could you imagine, profitable. So you found your story, you have all this footage, all this incredible stuff compiled, ready to go. You're in the edit. Let's talk about finishing your documentary. Love how that I'm completely naked under this. Room tone for the dryer. Episode, this is 8? 7? 7. This is 7. A little bit of lemon this time in this. Okay. Ooh. Okay, I wrote something. This is the log line for this. I'll read it to you aloud. I feel like I'm back in church at the podium. The word of the Lord. Here we go. Don't second guess all your hard work. Get it done. Stay on course. Show the people. Wow. Yes, agreed. This episode is going to be about finishing, crossing the finish line, something that a lot of artists have a problem with, something I've never had a problem with. I don't know why. I am the person that will get everything done regardless of how it gets done. I think maybe that's why I do it, is I'm not a perfectionist, so whatever it is, and I'll get it done. You should get it done. Do not shelve your projects. Please do not do that to us, the people that want to see your work. For me, this is an incredible reminder. For this project specifically, it had been 5 years, 6 years until I released this. So I had been finishing it for a long time, and I'm okay with that because I knew it would get done. And I knew there was no rush, specifically because, and I've been seeing this, I just had a screening of the newest version of this, which is a 20-minute version. We'll get to that in the next episode. Yes, a 20-minute version of this story just showed on the Border Wall, the film festival, Nogales International Film Festival, which is run by a nonprofit here in Arizona. So shot this 2016-17, and it just had a screening in 2025, and it is now more relevant than ever. So that's the beauty of documentary. That's the beauty of good stories, especially ones that tell the growth of towns, cities, people, groups, etc., is that because things change so often in our world, in our society, your work can speak to people many, many years from now. And don't forget that. So just because you might be telling, I've talked a lot about this with other documentary people, like, once the war in Ukraine started, it was like, oh, here we go. Like, get ready for 100 documentaries about Ukraine. And that's fine. But it's like the people that found very specific stories in there, people that are dealing with war and the personalization of that will be timeless, because war is timeless, which is really sad to say, but maybe not. Find a way to finish your film. It will be relevant. And maybe that's a good way to think about, if you haven't started yet, is how do you make your film relevant for all of eternity? That's a good thing to think about as you're starting. So let's talk about, yes, first thing. Oh man, there will inevitably be an itch to constantly want to change your project, evolve it, add something to it, because you might think it's not good enough for public consumption. That is something I think most artists, storytellers deal with, in terms of, I'm going to fail, this is going to crash and burn, people are going to make fun of me, it's not going to be as good as I thought it was going to be, etc. That is something that I've always had, in terms of like, oh, I know this isn't good enough. And I've always rationalized it in a very technical matter, which is a bummer. It manifests itself in many different ways. For me, it's always technical, because I know, obviously 10 plus years in the industry, I know what is good and what's, the quotes are back. I can't believe I did it. I know what's good and what's not good in terms of general consumption, general consensus. And we're going to talk about the opposite of that and how that applies to my project in a bit. But for now, I know what quality is, and I know you get what I'm saying. So all of that to say is, I've always seen in my stuff that it's like not good enough. I know it's good, and I know it's good for what I'm doing, but I know it's not good enough. And that sucks. And I always remind myself that, like, one day I'm going to get to that place where I'm going to have 200 grand to spend on a project. I couldn't even imagine like what I would do with that money. But that's the point, is like, I know where I can be and where other people are. And it's not, obviously, good reminder, it's not good to compare yourself to other people, especially on the internet, but it's good to have goals. And I want to get there one day where I'm telling a very intimate, personal documentary story that I always do. That's my style of documentary for sure. But I want there to be a ton of money and resources behind it, and a way to touch more people. And we'll get to that in a second too with mine. So that's that. Yeah, I kind of touched on this a little bit before. Kind of the idea, this is what it says. It says, talk about how it's too loose of a story, realizing it was about learning and temporary nature, but not enough into each one of those to cover that. So I talked about this a little bit before, but it's a good reminder, is you need to hone in on your story. And in the edit, maybe this is a good place to do that. And that is a good reminder of why you should be editing, which is what we talked about last episode. You should be editing along the way and shaping the story along the way, because then you'll know what you're missing. And I did a bit of that. I did too much of discovery, and there wasn't a general consensus at the end of it, and that's a bummer. And so I had to basically make stories in the edit, which is never a good thing. You shouldn't have to, well, maybe that's wrong. In feature film, yeah, they always say that. They're like, you find the story in the edit. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think you find a more interesting story, or maybe, you see what I'm saying. The edit allows you to really find things maybe you weren't thinking about, or discover something new. But I think they say that in the wrong way, because you still need the story in the can. Like, you need it, because if not, you're going to have to go back. And that's why they have reshoots. And that's the point, is, reshoots are a thing, because you've realized that you're missing something. So I couldn't do that with this. And I knew that already. Like I said, from day one, there were already people that were gone that had started this movement in Tucson. So I knew that, like, part of the story was missing. I got lucky because one of them came back to the States and I got to interview them, and that's great. And so, what I did with that was I was able to take the story they told about something that had happened when I wasn't even here in the very beginning. Remember, I explained the 1-year party, the quotes, the 1-year party. It's not in quotes. It's just what it is. The 1-year party was the 1 year for them, not for me, of shooting. So he, did this semi-illegal underground warehouse party. And he came back, and I was lucky to have him talk about it, because the other subject or subjects wouldn't really talk about it. One specifically was like, I refuse to talk about it and I don't want it in there. And I was like, okay. At this point, I explained earlier, I was kind of done with this one person and like having them drive the story. And so I'm glad that I was lucky enough to find this guy that came back to the States, was able to interview him, and I just used animation to while he was telling the story, put a bit of visual to it. And it's great. People love it. So, and it was very cheap. A little tidbit for that is animation is very expensive. With AI, I think that's going to change very quickly here, even right now. On this day, I think you can get AI to make you something pretty easily. My kind of workaround to still use people and pay people was, there were 3 students in Detroit at like in an animation class, like / course. And I got in touch with the teacher, and they were like, yes, they would love to do this. And I was like, and I'm going to pay. And they were like, you're going to pay? And I was like, yes, of course. And so I think the kids just enjoyed that, like getting paid to do something, probably the first time they got paid to do something. And then for me, it was just like so cool to see them work. And what they gave me was, I had them change one thing, and that was great. I think it was like the race of someone. I think they got the race of someone wrong. And I was like, So anyway, that was an incredible process. I won't go too much into that, but that was fun. And so you can do stuff like that. But all of that to say is that I was too loose with my story. And then so many people left, so many things changed, that it was over. There was no going back. And I remember that moment where I was like, oh, right, like this is it, which is a bummer. So what I had was what I had to work with. I hope that doesn't happen to you, but that is life. Everyone put it. Yeah, and this is really interesting as well. And I just figured this out today to mention this. Another struggle that I had was, and this is definitely a Tucson thing, small community type thing, is everyone mentioned something different for the reason that this was happening, or the reason that it was dying out, or the reason that things come and go. And everyone had a different reason. You know, some people were like, well, it's just the temporary nature of Tucson. Like, it's a university town. People come and go. There's no industry here, so they don't stay. Or like, people are like, well, it has to do with all the drama in the community, or like it has to do with like not enough good paying jobs, or like not enough housing, or like the infrastructure, and like, or the people coming in and knocking everything down and building student housing and like ruining rent and like all this. Everyone had a different reason, which is a bummer. And so truly in these interviews, I have stuff in the washer, sorry. In these interviews, I've washed this, just so you know. In these interviews, they all had something different to say, which is fair. But like I mentioned before in the last episode, I believe it was, is you need to be able to tell people what needs to be said or heard. At some point, it's like you can't just have all these differing opinions. And although that is true, the nature of it is like literally true, where it's like everyone had their own opinion, and that's why, you know, in their situation this was happening. But it's like that doesn't sound good when you put it all together, because it's like you're just throwing things from every different direction. Highly suggest not doing that. You need to have a cohesive narrative in your film for it to work. So that's something for sure to pay attention to. Other things I tried, yeah, this was fun. I tried a couple different things. I'll insert them here. I remember, God, it must have been 2020, like during the pandemic. I was like, okay, like how can I shift this? How can I make this work? And I was like, oh, maybe I can insert myself in a documentary, something I hate doing. I don't do voiceovers. I don't interview myself. I'm not like the subject that leads the story along. But I was like, maybe I'll try it. It's like, it's trendy, you know, it's the whole Vice thing where you're like talking to the camera, you're like, in this town, like that kind of thing. I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And so I remember going out with my friend, driving around in the car and going to each venue, kind of the same thing that I was doing, and being like, you know, this was knocked down, this is what was happening, this is what it is now, and like just kind of explain, like, here's the construction where the illegal underground party was, and now they're building this whole. I would go to each site and kind of give the story behind it, introduce it, and then push the story along.
And cameras roll.
Okay, this is going to be turning on to Congress to go to Playground 1. Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Here we go. I'm just going to drive for a second. So we're on Broadway Boulevard. I think it's a boulevard. And driving east downtown towards the center, the heart of downtown. Behind me is a place called Martin Drug Co. And I have a little bit of footage from this that you'll see. This is a weird spot as well. It's owned by Playground, but was only open right before the pandemic, and also during the pandemic it closed, and they're clearing it out. This was actually a building called Small Planet Bakery. So the Small Planet Bakery is exactly what it sounds like. You know, that was, as we talked before, all a part of the building the web of the story. Is I saw the web and I was like, there's something missing in here. I can fill the gaps. It's cheap. It's definitely a cheap way out. I've always believed, and I still do believe, that you should be able to tell a story with just the people you're interviewing and the subject matter. You shouldn't have to insert yourself. But yeah, anyways, yeah, and I think I did mention this before. There was some really fun, like, I tried to insert interviews because it was so interview driven in different places all over the city. So it's like you go to this place where a party was, and on the wall, like in this circle, like this guy's face would show up and he'd be talking to you. And this way, it's like you're not just staring at, you know, a talking head. It's like you're seeing an environment. It's like it's an immersive environment, like a layered thing I was trying to do. Or I remember when I was driving on the highway, and on the screen of, you know, the display of the car, I had the interview pop up. And so it's just like you're seeing the road, but you're seeing this guy talk to you. Like, there were cool ways that I thought like I could find a way around the mundaneness of just like interview after interview after interview. And I did bring this up before, and it's good to mention, is I truly only had party footage and interviews. And so it's like that wasn't enough. Truly, it wasn't enough. And that's my fault, because I didn't choose one or several people to follow. I didn't insert their life or personal stuff into it. I really only had before a party, during, and after a party, and that's it. And that's fine, but this was too personal of a story to do that. And so that's what I would have done. And, you know, speaking of reshoots, that's, you know, the easiest thing you could have done for a reshoot is you're in the edit and you're like, we need way more walking around, or like having conversations in public with people, or like showing this person's daily life, like whatever it may be. you would have gone back to shoot that. But again, I literally couldn't. All of these people were gone. So it was what it was. Yeah, again, just a reminder, all of this stuff, all of these mistakes kind of snowball, and everything I've talked about from episode 1, if you are missing these things along the way, you are just building more and more and more problems for yourself. And you're building this very fragile tower that a little wind will come by and it'll knock everything down. And that is kind of what happened to me, is I just made so many missteps. And I put too much trust into people and just the story itself and myself, that ended up being a problem, very obviously, in the end. So yeah, I'll talk about, I mentioned there's a 20-minute version of this. There is a 60-minute version, 60 of this. That was the first version of this. And truly it was about the temporary nature of the people and places in Tucson. And that was the narrative that I put together with the interviews, because enough people said, like, you know, everyone comes and goes, like people stop showing up, like they get bored of the same thing here. Like enough people said that where I was like, okay, this works. And so what I would do is I drove around in the back of someone's pickup truck, and I just, like, literally, because I wanted to show how close everything was. Everything was in a 1-mile radius. Every single venue you could go to for these parties was within a mile. It was in walking distance, truly, of this small downtown of Tucson. And so I drove around and just showed just like street venue, just like how quickly you could get to these places. And then every time I showed up to a venue, it would go into that party footage, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the idea. That was kind of the flow of it. And then it was, after, a certain time, someone would say something, and then a little text slide in terms of like, this person left and went there. This person went there. Like, this venue closed. So it was more technical in nature, and people liked that. It was received very well. And I think the next thing I'm going to say, is I ended up screening that mostly locally all over the U.S. for people that I knew and people that I knew would love this story. So the people of Tucson, specifically the people in the music scene, adored this. Every single person that saw it was like, thank you for doing this. Like, this is incredible. Like, you've captured a moment in time that will never be forgotten now. And I agree, that is what happened, and I'm glad I did. I had a cute little pop-up screening during the pandemic at a bar that my friend owns, and was able to screen it with nice speakers. It looked great. It sounded great. Everyone was able to social distance, where they wanted. And it was great. And it drove business to him, which was also wonderful. And it was good. I got to talk a little bit with them after. It was some people that were in the film, with some people connected to the film, a few people that had no idea this music movement was even happening in Tucson. So that was great. It was like 60 people or so. That gave me a little boost of energy to keep going, truly. If I hadn't done something like that, I don't know where this project would be. So I definitely suggest doing something like that. Get it out there, have a small screening, get people looking at this and going, oh, wow, I like what you're doing, just to get a bit of encouragement or a little bit of feedback. It doesn't have to be, I think the tickets, did I charge people for tickets? Maybe $5, maybe 10 at the most. Again, just for the venue, really. And so it was wonderful. And that kind of led to, like, I did more local screenings in an art gallery down the road. More people showed up for that. I did that myself, just in my friend's like little art studio space. That was cool as well. Then I ultimately screened it at the local Arizona Underground Film Festival, which is this beautiful theater downtown, kind of classic. Friend used to own the theater at the time. He's like, I will definitely program this, like, no worries. And that showed right before another music documentary, like a big one that year. That was 2021. And so I was like, this is great. Like, this is working out. And again, that was like 100 people, mostly, of course, locals, because it was a local film festival. But then there was a huge Q&A after that. And I was like so happy that more new people got to see it. And people came down from Phoenix and they were like, yeah, like, we heard about this. Like, it's really cool to see the evidence. And that was just cool in itself. So again, I just kept pushing it to people I knew would want to see it. And then ultimately I just, again, through a connection, Movement Detroit, which used to be DEMF, for Detroit Electronic Music Festival, the big techno festival in Detroit. I was like, oh, well, I got to show this here. Like, I'm from Michigan. And so I got very lucky. He had this venue like just down the road from the center of Detroit. I set up a screen, I set up speakers, and then we did a double feature with this guy that I know who runs Cinema Lamont, it's called, in Detroit. Does a lot of free screenings, a lot of, whatever indie screenings. He's a great guy. And he got Sisters with Transistors to let him, license and screen the film. So we showed that. Then we showed mine to the same people. People stayed after, they watched it. Like, it was great. And like, just the whole experience. I mean, we got 2 or 3 DJs to come out and DJ before, and in between we had the gal from the local whatever you'd call that store, like, show some synths and like, stuff that you could use to make music, and it's stuff like that. And again, that was like probably 80 people max, just all on chairs or laying on the grass, like in this backyard of this old workers row house. Truly historical spot in Detroit. And it's stuff like that I was like, man, this is what it's about. But of course, I made no money off of any of this. If anything, I probably spent money when it was all said and done. But that was very helpful to me, because it was like, people get it. Like, although this is a very specific story, it still is broad enough for people in music communities or DIY communities to know what's happening here. They've been through it, or they know what's going on. And so, yeah, it's not a broader appeal, especially because it was so low budget, and it doesn't, like we mentioned earlier in all of this, like, it doesn't keep you engaged. It's not like, every 10 minutes, it's like, bah, bah, bah. It's not like that. It's a story. And so it was always for very specific people, and I'm glad I kept it to them because, and yeah, we're going to talk about the next episode is I learned from that. And I wanted more people to see this because I knew there was a story in it. But I knew they couldn't see the 60-minute version. And I even tried submitting to some film festivals, but again, this was during the pandemic. Like, I withdrew most of it because, like, when the time came, 2020, 2021, they were re-shutting down again in 2021. I was like, okay, well. And so we just didn't know what was happening with venues still at that point. So I withdrew most of them. The 60-minute version wasn't right for public consumption. I knew that for a fact. That is very true. And that inspired wanting to go back and tell a more palatable 20-minute or less version for film festivals. And I knew that was still long, but I wanted it to be 20 minutes or less for film festivals, telling this whole story in a more snappy, dramatic, exciting, like, energy-driven way. And so I set out to do that. And that will be the next episode, is talking about taking a new direction, finding new angles in your story, and that is what you do in the edit, is finding new directions to go in. So I hope you enjoyed this. We will talk about, that new direction, the new angle next time. Gonna go hang my clothes to dry. Oh, I'm gonna do this again. Forgot this is how I end every episode. I didn't know it, but you feel like a little bit of lemon in there.